Hi again, I'm Laurel, and I'm working with the Performing Arts Academy to help you learn about music theory. This is going to be the last video for Level 1, and if you didn't see the others already, you can find links to them in the description. In this video, we're going to cover note values and time signatures. Let's start with note values. What do I mean when I say note values? Well, the note value of a note just tells us how long to hold it compared to the other notes in a piece of music. The most common note values that we'll see are whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, and eighth notes. Let's look at each one. A quarter note looks like this. The note head is filled in, and it has a stem. A quarter note most commonly gets one beat, so it's easiest to think of it as our base note value. In a 4/4 measure, playing only quarter notes would sound like this. So again, this is a quarter note and it gets one beat. A half note looks like this. It has a stem like a quarter note, but the note head isn't filled in. A half note is held twice as long as a quarter note, so it most commonly gets two beats. In a 4/4 measure, playing only half notes would sound like this. So again, this is a half note and it gets two beats. A whole note looks like this. The note head isn't filled in and it also doesn't have a stem. It's basically just a circle. A whole note is held 4 times as long as a quarter note or twice as long as a half note, so it usually gets 4 beats. In a 4/4 measure, a whole note would take up the entire measure and it would be held the whole time. It would sound like this. So one more time, this is a whole note, and it gets 4 beats. Now, last but not least, an eighth note looks like this. The note head is filled in like a quarter note, and it has a stem, but it also has a flag. An eighth note is held only half as long as a quarter note, so it usually gets half a beat. In other words, there are 2 eighth notes in a beat. In a 4/4 measure, playing only eighth notes would sound like this. So again, this is an eighth note and it gets half a beat. Now, I keep referring to something called a 4/4 measure, but I haven't explained what that is yet, so let's do that now. You remember in the last video we had something called key signatures that would tell us what pitches to use in a piece of music. Well, there's also something called a time signature, which we're going to talk about now. Time signatures tell us how many beats are in each measure and which note value gets one beat. When you see a time signature in a piece of music, it's going to have 2 numbers stacked on top of each other, like this. Each of these 2 numbers tells us something different. In this time signature, there's a 4 on top and a 4 on bottom, so we call this 4/4 time. So what do these numbers mean? Let's look at the bottom number first. A 4 on the bottom of our time signature tells us that a quarter note gets 1 beat. One way to help us remember this is to think about the fact that in fractions, having a 4 on the bottom means that we're talking in terms of quarters. It's the same thing with time signatures. Having a 4 on the bottom means that we're talking about quarter notes. So what does the top number mean? Well, the 4 on the top just tells us that there are 4 beats per measure. So in 4/4 time, a quarter note gets 1 beat, and there are 4 beats per measure. So that just tells us that we're going to have something that's equivalent to 4 quarter notes in every measure. But what if there were a different number on top? That would tell us that we have a different number of beats per measure. Another time signature that we see quite frequently in music is 3/4 time, where we have a 3 on top and a 4 on bottom. Just like in 4/4 time, the 4 on the bottom means that the quarter note gets 1 beat, but the 3 on top tells us that there are only 3 beats in a measure. Listen to these examples and see if you can hear the difference between 4/4 time and 3/4 time. one more time signature. This is 2/4 time. What do you think the 4 on the bottom means in this time signature? Just like in 4/4 time and 3/4 time, the 4 on the bottom means that a quarter note gets 1 beat. What about the 2 on the top? It means that there are only going to be 2 beats per measure. So there will be something equivalent to 2 quarter notes in every measure. Here's an example of what this might look like. So once again, note values tell us how long to hold a note compared to the other notes in a piece. Our most common note values are eighth notes, quarter notes, half notes, and whole notes. Time signatures tell us 2 pieces of information. The top number tells us how many beats are in a measure, and the bottom number tells us what note value gets 1 beat. So that's it for level 1. You've now learned about the staff, clefs, and note names, dynamics and whole and half steps, sharps, flats, key signatures, and now note values and time signatures. That's a lot of stuff to remember, so keep practicing and keep up the good work.